Behind the ostensible government sits enthroned an invisible government, owing no allegiance and acknowledging no responsibility to the people. To destroy this invisible government, to befoul the unholy alliance between corrupt business and corrupt politics, is the first task of the statesmanship of the day.
Who run Barter Town? Who run Barter Town?
Master Blaster.
Master Blaster? What?
Master Blaster runs Barter Town.
The meek don't inherit shit. Earth belongs to the wolves.
Devil's Workshop 23. The Rise of Hydra, Advancement Beyond Patriarchy, and Obsolation of Skynet. Through the use of software that incentivizes communication and sharing, societal models based on unhealthy ideas eventually lose support. With improved communication combined with a more empowered populace likely already on a freedom and self-sufficient path, we can overcome the limiting ideas of patriarchy in business. People in an empowered position outgrow the expectation of needing an AI to save us from our economy. What is Hydra? Hydra is software that displays and manages data. The self-imposed constraints are that it's open and customizable, doesn't need the internet or AI to function, there's no license as it's technically not even being distributed, and there's basically no strings attached whatsoever. So, if you have your computer, hardware, and electricity, you can use your Hydra. Data is generally displayed in web browsers, and it runs with the Java language inside the Tomcat web server and stores data in MySQL. And it runs on Linux, Mac, and Raspberry Pi. Probably runs on Windows too, but haven't tried. So here are some basics to get started. So there's data, there's displaying data, and editing it. So spreadsheets like Excel or Google Docs are a database, an editor, and a displayer all in one. So you can display data in a grid, or you can display it in other ways, like a chart. And if you update the data, so Janet Jackson moves to New York, then the data is displayed and the changes reflected in other places because it's the same data just being displayed differently. Much like Google Docs, Hydra, accessible via a web browser, also has a basic table with the standard features. Con is the name of the display layer that is written in JavaScript. It can be used to display data in other ways, not just a table, and being open, those implementing it can tailor it as much as they're willing. So for managing data, a Hydra can function as an assistant performing basic tasks like updating an address book. I use it to gather information on my inverter and solar panels, or gather temperature or sensor data, maybe watch a camera feed, or get the next day's forecast. And then Hydra uses that. So if you're watching a camera feed, maybe I can get an alert if there's motion in the camera. If I leave a door open, I can turn on a fan to keep the bugs out. If the garage gets too hot, you can vent it. If it's cold, or you're expecting it to be cold and there's going to be sun the next day, so you don't have to worry about getting charged, you can turn heaters on. Or similarly, if there's enough sun the next day and you're not worried about being cold, you can mine for cryptocurrency. There's sales quality and more of an exploratory quality. So selling quality usually has like a well-defined and tested product, whereas I'm just basically building what I need and improving and genericizing some things later. So the exploratory code is less functional in capability and certainly a little more messy, but more tailored to what the end user wants. And it doesn't have to be on one computer. It's easy to make use of older, slower computers to do time-lapse or watch a camera feed, and you can network them together or have them be completely separate. So my local net shares tasks like streaming from cameras and check temperature and voltage, and if used over the internet, different cooperative communities could exchange things like inventory, text, and video messages. And you wouldn't even need their internet. You could just communicate directly with others. We wouldn't even need to listen to advertisers or business. This improved communication channel amplifies the type of quality of ideas that get shared. Much like a social media that has friends versus followers, the quality is what you make of it. And if you don't check your traditional email, you don't have to worry about getting spam. So we can build trusted social media networks and news networks with algorithms designed to inform us rather than program, thus creating a healthier narrative. I've never quite closed the gap on getting from where we are here and now to a network of people who actually own the land and are cooperating enough to not need the business world. Mostly because there isn't one path, as people prepping generally push against whatever their biggest obstacle happens to be. So there isn't much need to make a detailed map given the unknown landscape. But there are ways I think it won't work. A political movement type of push would be to have, say, the business world rent land from the locals. And this would create an environment where land is cheap as measured by the amount of human hours work needed to live on an acre. So how would you get them to rezone the land? Well, it's the same as everything else. Getting a person in power who can withstand all the corruption, and that's difficult. It's the same old story regarding centralized power. The deal in life was to work 20 years and retire. So my plan was to save enough for the basic retirement and then unwind a year and figure out what else I wanted to do. During my retirement, I saw Bernie as different from Bush and Clinton, like he was actually advocating for healthcare, and I tried to motivate people to seize this opportunity. But the DNC runs its primary a little different than I expected, and we know how things turned out. So retirement was going great, but I was kind of unsettled. The downtown high-rises weren't full of other people with free time or retired. They're empty. Everyone had to work, or the apartments were owned by someone who visits maybe one day a year. But even with hardly anyone else there, I couldn't do basic things like invite 3 friends over to enjoy the pool, because with kids, you quickly overreach the 8-person maximum. I know, first world problems, but this was also my retirement and supposedly the thing I spent 20 years working to achieve. Politics continued to be crazy. Russia reigned on instead of people healing from the 2016 election. So I tried running for Congress on a cooperative idea that I thought would spread quickly via friends and beyond, and then Southern California would be well on its way to freeing itself from the business world. But I didn't make the ballot, and that idea didn't explode. So over in the real world, the economy was actually looking decent, and belief in the mainstream media was fading. I thought the swamp draining by Trump and Q and friends would be a little more public at this point, and then preppers would be happy that they prepped. But clearly, they didn't feel like being drained, and seemingly out of nowhere, but probably should have seen it coming. Since then, we've had a stolen election, shipping crisis, egg and toilet paper shortage, but no crash. And I thought by June of 2021, we would see a housing crash. But even after filing for bankruptcy, BlackRock and friends jumped into the housing market, keeping prices stable. I used to laugh at the housing development around me. It's like, who is lending the money for all these new houses when we face a sketchy job market, a pandemic, and maybe even a population decline? But they knew something I didn't because it hasn't stopped. There's even a new winery several miles away that's being developed all throughout the pandemic. So I expected a crash, and that wasn't the case, and the economy seemed to be more stable than I gave it credit for. Now, I still like the cooperative path, if for no other reason than it has a better end result than the business world for those who participate. So prepping continues, but for reasons other than instability. Now, with many things seeming to be managed, including history and people's responses, one could feel like Truman in The Truman Show, and that would explain the feeling of being in a Potemkin village. Given the oddly stable state of the economy and no crash or swamp draining, I find myself still buying water from the government, getting food from the grocery store, and I still use Amazon. I may not be a fan of capitalism, but I'm not naive enough to think it needs to die, especially since we need it to live. And admittedly, it's hard to start. One usually has to move far away where it's cheaper, and unfortunately leaving friends and family and community behind. And it's hard to find people who both want and have the availability to build a new, yet-to-be-defined, decentralized node. The good news is there's always things an individual can do until an opportunity presents itself, like health, new personal and physical skills, people to meet, and resting. Maybe people just need a few years off to relax. So how to get to the point where the public collectively, in a decentralized way, owns enough land to network with other like-minded people? Not just to push to zone the land for community-minded neighborhoods or front porches, or even unrigging the markets such that BlackRock and friends don't buy vacant lots and help dictate the price of life, but an entire reframing of who has the authority to zone the land and dictate the terms. In other words, a narrative where the business world doesn't own everything by default. Similar to how belief in democracy or fiat currency is fading, there will be a fading acceptance of a narrative that has the preconditions of working in a rigged economy to live on land which isn't scarce. And, despite how rigged and pointless our economy is, we also can't just flip a switch, as any significant move would trigger liquidity issues in banks and cause other downstream ramifications, including 401ks and IRAs. As people get healthier and grow and become more locally self-sufficient and less prone to corporate narratives like Russia or COVID-19, it'll be commonly known that zoning the land to force people to need fiat currency is suspect. It will be hard for the them to win the overall battle for resources if people both don't believe their narrative and are actively preparing to opt out. One strategy, it's MAGA, is to overcome enough of the corruption and win an election on the existing system. Now, I'm not alone in the expectation that they will burn it to the ground and walk away before they allow it willingly to be used by their enemies. They wouldn't allow the public to own land free and clear any more than they'd respect an election that results in the loss of their power.
Maybe the decision about what's best for everyone should be left to, well, everyone.
Maybe we should give the dogs a vote as well.
I'll ask my horse.
The whole point of their game is to be in power, mostly accomplished by ensuring people have less wealth. So their hand must be forced. And if locals owning the land free and clear with open communication is all it takes, there's an alternative path forward of having enough outspoken, freedom-minded people networking to outgrow their corrupt local government. People nearly need enough money outright to own the land that they can live off of. Well, enter Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a deflationary asset out of control of the business world, and that gives people an alternative when they come to rob any of the remaining wealth the public has. They took gold in the 1900s, around the time the Federal Reserve started. Prior to that, people owned the land but didn't have enough energy and technology. So, since energy and oil was brought into the equation in the early 1900s, people owning the land free and clear became a threat. So any in-demand asset, like land, made artificially scarce, will eventually be exposed to the pressure from the deflationary asset out of their control, Bitcoin. That means it will take effort via a nonsense narrative to keep land expensive if it's actually available in abundance, and difficult to keep Bitcoin cheap. But it's the narrative and communication from a common purpose that ultimately forces the issue.
What is to prevent, say, an uprising that can lead to revolution? And then in a fraction of time, the whole system collapses.
It must be a fragile system if it can be brought down by just a few berries.
Yes, it is indeed.
Since the narrative ultimately wins, widespread communication, usually from a common purpose, is all it really takes. How the business world relents to public pressure isn't all that relevant. When those without any resources have as much communication as those in power, new ideas are subjected to a chatty and interested public. When decisions made at the top are kept in check and governed by the result of open communication by those without assets, then the system is kept in check if for no other reason than the leaders fear the response of an unruly and informed populace. Maybe too many citizens are ready to go alone or pick up a pitchfork and head to some capital. The more an authentic public narrative becomes the standard, the more tools and processes will be tailored to that end goal. as opposed to something nefarious. We wouldn't spend our free time developing communication tools that are seeking dopamine hits or narrative conditioning in the background. Currently, due to the available tools, it's easy enough to create a website, whereas that used to be a little more difficult. And the same could be true for running a mini dictatorship or a large homestead. Tools boosting healthy communication help keep the narrative clean. And a world could be run by kings or even a dictator if enough of us apes at the bottom communicated, remained aware of their game, and identified parasitic threats. There's a reason why the business world limits our communication. They already know we can be better. A populace that has grown and normalized an authentic narrative would be considered a threat itself. Think of authentic narrative as getting together with a close circle of friends and to talk about important stuff if needed, or maybe chat about less stressful things if everything else is fine. Basically, being real. There's no ulterior motives, there's certainly no advertising. And compare that with a commodified narrative, which pretends that the economy isn't horribly rigged and our overall life direction is just fine. See, an alternative would be to talk about our biggest obstacles. So we have videos of younger people being unhappy about the future, and those are signs that a generation isn't on board with the default options our system provides. So one example of an authentic narrative would be to prioritize what to do about having to sell your soul just to have access to a small slice of land.
Just remember, money buys nothing.
Well, nothing important, right?
No. Money literally buys nothing.
I think you mean metaphorically.
No, literally, nothing.
Literally, money buys most things.
No, nothing. Right? Are you saying that?
No,
well, I'm saying that literally,
I'm saying literally money buys nothing. I don't know what
it buys nothing.
You're right. Money pays for nothing.
That's right.
Money isn't evil, but an incredibly useful tool because bartering is limiting and inefficient. What happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object?
2 men enter, 1 man leaves.
We have scarcity, which could have front row seats that fetch a premium. How to resolve scarcity? Money. Now, it may not be the most productive use of time to obsess about acquiring more money, and we are going to need money until nothing, anywhere, is ever scarce, which is unlikely to happen anytime soon. But since mutual voluntary cooperation will be at the core of a new model, most things will be available in abundance merely in exchange for our participation. And if one wanted, they could live a simple life without money. So in tennis and soccer, the moves a player can make are determined by the accepted rules of the game. You hit the ball back with a racket, or you kick a ball into a goal. In life, our available moves are determined by the accepted game of capitalism. Who is in charge? It's not any of the players. In Mad Max terms, it's neither Master Blaster or Ant Entity. It's the game itself that the masses accept. For us, that understood game is capitalism. And if the available moves and options are determined by the game, and we want to be free, we need a machine that produces a game that favors our freedom. Buying local and bartering may be an improvement, but it's not a threat to global business, because even in those economies, people aren't seeing the main prison constraint that we've inherited. That is, getting people to solve problems and viewing life within the business and authority mindset. And that includes the business world owning the land by default, and not the people living there. The business world implies laws which need government, police, and court, and etc. And then at every point, the public must keep all of those institutions free from corruption. Parasites, vampires, and vultures are going to exist, and they're going to find a home and continue to thrive with centralized authority, i.e., any capitalist system. People believing capitalism will work and is the only way to be is all the opportunity and fuel the business world needs to keep running. People don't have to endorse human trafficking or poverty. They only need to continue on a path where corruption can flourish. In the past, people were tagged with armbands to signify being part of a group. So similar to being tagged with armbands, a video with advertising is kind of tagged with the message of, I may be a powerful spiritual being, but for now my existence is a mere player in the game of business.
So anybody who is a public official, this is my
By the way, this is nominally the reason I make these damn videos, is to sell this stuff.
If someone produces a show and has ads and sponsors and an agenda, as a consumer of content, you know they stay within the boundaries set by the business world. And it's understandable, given that we need money to live. The ill effects from capitalism run deep in our psyche. We create characters to survive in this business world, and we often spend so much time as this business character that we don't develop how to be other ways. The existence of business characters isn't bad. Kings and generals have responsibility for other lives which deserve respect above and beyond the two people playing the characters. And the point of our lives and container of our dreams shouldn't be limited by business. Oftentimes, the person can't even receive ideas that challenge their business character. Not only are we not taught how to communicate and listen for new ideas that could be triggering, we're not even honest that we have barriers to the new idea, let alone have a constructive path forward. Effectively turns people into defensive NPCs when certain subjects come up.
He actually uses sarcasm when he gets into uncomfortable confrontations.
Oh yeah, right. Like I do that.
It's a very masculine thing to assume that we can always logic and think our way through stuff. The error in this line of thought is that it's impossible to know what assumptions could be broken, both in our societal model and in our psyche, and then what possibilities open up. When I was originally told that anger was stored in the body, I didn't believe it. But perhaps it's more accurate to say the chemical and physical results of negative experiences are stored in the body. But it's just easier to say anger stored in the body. So it's hard to reason through things when toxins from previous trauma are triggering and preventing the person from understanding that idea. Common spot to store trauma is in our spine. So our posture correlates to, say, a baseline understanding of how good we feel in and about life. Are we nervous, cranky, angry, believe we have nothing to offer, energetic, happy, fulfilled? And our ability to digest difficult ideas. Knowing what to do is only part of the battle. Even if the masculine tried deeply to understand what is being expressed by the feminine, we currently couldn't emotionally handle it. Because to deal with some ideas mean you have to deal with other unpleasant ramifications. The communication failure is putting it lightly. So consider the difference in knowing it's possible to exist with little to no life anxiety and body pain, and compare that to experiencing one level of anxiety and then having it lifted. Having both experiences, plus the growth, provides an understanding of a perspective that can be difficult to convey with words alone unless the other person has had a relatable experience. The other person might not even comprehend the premise of the situation or why it's important, because then they'd have to deal with some other idea first, which triggers trauma stored in their body. And that's just on the way to understanding that idea. So how can we successfully communicate despite those barriers? Oftentimes we can't. Regarding critical thinking, recently we were presented with the decision of whether or not to take the COVID jab. So if one accepted this internet factoid that was going around, it basically said COVID was asymptomatically infectious and 99% survivable. So you would only have to worry if someone went out in the middle of a pandemic while showing symptoms and you got infected from them and you were unhealthy. So many in the anti-vax crowd accuse those who took the jab of being stupid. But that's not how people make decisions. Because for this factoid to be correct, the implication is that the mainstream media and medical industry were very wrong. And it's easy and normal in that situation just to assume that there was something wrong with that internet factoid. It wouldn't be the first internet factoid to get it wrong. Jimmy Dore said it best. It's not that he trusted the mainstream media to take the jab. He trusted his doctor, and supposedly the expert, who unfortunately trusted the mainstream media. So the trick is to explore positions that are triggering to you, as that is usually a sign that you are worried about the validity of your position. The default narrative suggests and implies that men don't get emotional when communicating, unlike women. But actually, we men are taught to deflect, debate, as if the conversation is a joust. Since anger is an emotion, consider that men are too emotional not only to hear new ideas, but even be in a state of mind where they would try to work through the emotions to hear the new idea, something that isn't seen in movies or TV shows. It's not just getting the mansplainer in a state where they actually shut up, but to get them to consider that they don't know all the perspectives and to shift their entire goal and approach to the conversation. Getting someone in a state to hear challenging ideas might be the biggest challenge itself, especially when the topic surrounds the masculine, feminine, or ego and money. And there are plenty of reasons why men are like that. Life is not easy, and the business world floods the narrative with how not to be. So in the response to the idea of white male privilege, the business narrative pushes two general options. There's the left, which is being guilty and victimy, and then there's the right, which denies the whole situation indignantly. Now, what is the privilege? So this topic deserves way more time, but quickly, an example would be to not have to fight a self-worth battle based on your skin color, or expending energy invoking a constant state of hypervigilance just to go outside because of safety. More on this later, but one example of how women feel around random men in the public is this "what would women do for a day" without men question. Now, I'm not saying men have it easy or it's fair, but if the situation is two rats shocked in a cage, it's possible and likely for one of them to have a better position in the cage. Since the content producer's highest goal isn't the message, they often conflate clicks and monetization with being censored in the overall human struggle. Truthers should know that Google won't amplify their voice and pay them to do it if the message is going to harm some business agenda. It's a little insulting to those who have been censored or worse. At least CNN isn't pretending not to be a business, but so-called truthers or light workers don't live as if they believe or understand what they're saying. And think of the narrative as blood for our society, and we are poisoning it by limiting our speech, thought, and intentions through the lens of their money and rules. You don't pretend to your close circle that you have a viable solution to things when you don't. That's almost lying. However, our narrative is filled with things like fake confidence and vibes of "follow me, I have the answers," when they don't. An unfounded, fake confidence seems to be a prerequisite for being a content producer in the business world. So pretending to have solutions when you don't contributes to our authenticity problem with the narrative. A body can only be so healthy with polluted blood, and the same is a society with a polluted narrative. I have quite a few examples of narrative pollution. So there's a series called Solution Watch, which never talks about viable solutions. And at best, there are some life hacks, but it's mostly just product placement. And that pushes the vibe of there actually not being a viable solution that people can start now. So this content producer spends time, energy, and focus making more videos of research, as opposed to maybe setting up a new node with a bunch of freedom-minded people and helping to show the world how to do it. So not only is his life wasted, a little judgy, his content is encouraging others to remain stagnant. And to be fair, talking about a solution that upends the business world's hold over humanity could come with legal, financial, and physical ramifications. Speaking with authority about non-knowable concepts signals inauthenticity. So according to the internet, this is Robert, who took a Sanskrit name and claims to be a guru. Now, at best, these people are experts on someone else's teachings. But how do they know the original teachings were right? Now, being at peace in your body seems like a prerequisite for enlightenment. At least from my perspective, Shunya here would have to have a limited baseline understanding of how happy people can be based on his posture in the videos. He is carrying around unaddressed trauma in his body, and as a result, he might be missing key aspects of the teachings. Small things can have large impacts. Like as an example, people not at peace in a healthy body talk about meditation as if it's the practice of forcing or thinking your way through to a quiet mind. Now, getting good at not thinking is difficult, and that's also different than relaxing and unwinding in your body. A healthy body, I would think, is a prerequisite to being at peace. And being at peace is a prerequisite to being a guru. Some other narrative pollutions is rights come from God, and that frames the situation that God would intervene with our government, or that, in this case, voting is special. There's the notion that we are one. I don't know, given the last few years, I may not want to associate with some groups or ways of being, like human trafficking. Or the common question of, are you a God-fearing man? That implies that our only options are atheist and fearing God. This incentivizes spiritual beings to assume a subservient place in reality and only grow to certain boundaries. On a larger scale, a populace denying or afraid of a God would be easier to manage than one with a healthier connection. You notice the businessman emoji is hovering while humanity is on their knees. Probably not an accident. That's not a new thing, but influencers prop themselves up with tags like PhDs, indicating their intellect as a selling point. Or maybe even proclaim integrity, implying that you should trust their judgment. But how smart is their message if they can't even address basic things like flat Earth? Distant visible objects, according to our default narrative, are actually not in front of us, but around the curve of a planet that we can't see because light refracts due to air density being less. In flat Earth land, things in front of you are actually just in front of you because light goes straight. The exception is for holograms. But if these PhDs and people of integrity can't trust their own judgment to overcome ego and money concerns, why should their audience? Now, I get why people like Tim Pool and Jimmy Dore and others with a large audience don't go there, especially if people aren't claiming to be truthers. They're just claiming to read news on the internet. But for the overall narrative, people who claim to be telling you the truth, but can't address things right in front of them, are a little suspect. And on a more pragmatic level, if the business world's overall strategy is to ensure that we have less resources, those in the know should encourage people to hold Bitcoin, because a deflationary asset that challenges the banking system's ability to keep a population in debt is a good thing. If content producers know that they want us to have less resources and Bitcoin helps, why promote gold? As measured by wanting your followers to have more wealth, these content producers are wolves in sheep's clothing. There are even some pro-Bitcoin channels that are missing the point because they encourage people to use Bitcoin as opposed to holding it. It doesn't matter what vendors take. They can take any currency, and that's fine, but it matters if you can buy and hold Bitcoin. The business world can survive without many of its components. Flat Earth videos can cast serious doubt into our space programs and science, but the system can survive. And the same for fiat and medicine. The business world is likely happy to cut out unnecessary fat in the way of obsolete organizations. They'll find another way to create scarcity and an economy. However, pushing towards a new economy that serves people is likely not only a threat, but could be considered economic terrorism because it's disrupting commerce, or maybe even a national security issue or a classified idea. So it's understandable why content producers, subservient to business, don't talk about the most important topics, and that is viable solutions and alternatives to our default societal model. The business world put a lot of effort into this system. It takes a lot of conditioning. What's common between capitalism, communism, patriarchy, matriarchy, Islam, Christianity, and republics? The common person lives under authority. Capitalism requires courts and police to enforce contracts for commerce to flow. You can't have commerce without rules. While communists want the authority to do all of that and everything else. The common trait is that people look for some official authority to be in charge. Capitalism is the religion, and much because of the predictable scarcity, money becomes the god.
It's just a ride, and we can change it anytime we want. It's only a choice. No effort, no work, no job, no savings of money. A choice right now between fear and love.
Life is probably not just a ride, and it's the opposite of that Bill Hicks clip. Taking yourself seriously often refers to the character you're acting out. And then that character expects others to pretend like it's not a show. So like when politicians speak or a defense attorney says their client is innocent, they're not really actually saying anything. So this is not to be conflated with taking the opportunity of life seriously and being the stewards of this reality, and the impact on others one can have if they take that seriously. One is respecting the soul's journey, and the other is putting importance on some business character. The cult of capitalism impacts us on such a personal level that people, mostly men because we're more aggressive, often define and believe the entirety of their existence is a business character. And it's normal and even healthy to adapt to an environment because we'd be dead otherwise. And the environment that we've adapted to seems to be geared towards our focus being business, reputation, characters, and egos versus individually and collectively growing. Trauma, unaddressed in our body, makes it impossible to emotionally hear and deal with a topic. Successful deliverance of a message depends on the other side physically being able to hear it without interrupting, understand it, which means having enough matching life experience, and actually care. They may have a different baseline understanding of how much they care about themselves and each other.
I'd like to share a revelation that I've had during my time here. Human beings are a disease, a cancer of this planet.
No, humans adapted to a system that incentivizes us to lie and pretend like the system isn't rigged, perhaps behave like a disease or a cancer. Like any resilient life form, we adapted to our environment, and in our case, one with constant war and poverty. Ishmael got it wrong. The cause isn't agriculture, growth, or cities. We are presented options in life, but the assumed story might be what needs questioning. In other words, maybe someone doesn't want either pill. A big difference in what I propose in other parallel economies surrounds commerce, giving versus selling, and the resulting system. It doesn't have to be a moral choice, but a selfish one. Now, Christians are told that greed is a sin, while capitalism incentivizes aggressive behavior around money. So where do you draw the line? Be sinful or Christ-like? Well, consider an alternative, and not that even as some saint, but selfishly. One could want those around them to be able to grow potatoes and fight zombies, because then they don't have to worry as much about hunger and security. The people in groups with transparent motivations, sharing ideas freely, will likely fare better in the long run. And as the concept of consciously choosing a better long-term future normalizes, the available moves, as determined by the way the collective plays the game, open up, as we won't be fighting for resources or drowning in a toxic narrative. And you could still play the old game, work 20 years, but you won't need to. Which path we take to get from point A to point B, however, remains unclear. The increased sharing of healthy ideas results in increased interest in a better deal here in this reality. And the team options generally will be Team Human or Team Freedom versus the business world, which will show up as a government, corporation, or private contractor. And I expect them to make things worse until the public relents or grows immune. However, if the public grows strong enough in a decentralized way to not need the business world, how does the business world respond? Follow their rules and lose to an empowered populace, like counting votes accurately. Break their own well-established rules, the immutable bylaws of business, and their machine starts to fall apart. They're stuck between the best move being doing nothing, yet having to make a move that worsens their position.
You have information for us?
No, you already have the information. All the names and dates are inside your head. What you want, what you really need, is a story.
Our story and default narrative implies that we are merely animals okay with our lives being some business data point. Established religions have people living on their knees spiritually as well as underdeveloping mentally and emotionally. Toxic masculinity helps limit the scope of our existence by discouraging men from growing as the powerful beings we can be. The end result is widespread failure to communicate between the masculine and feminine, preventing a healthy connection. Similar to the question of what are we, one question to ask is what is our role? Rather than humans just living and serving an economy, consider that generically we are beings that direct energy. So you can move your arm, and make things happen, like sports and typing, or you can project your emotions or be supportive of people, which impacts the vibe of those around you. And you can manifest an entirely new path, which of course impacts those around you and everyone that experiences it, including like plants and animals. That's a lot of influence in this reality and over our bodies and other life, and is likely the reason why the business world is so pushy about people not growing and being healthy. Empowering of people also means empowering any group willing to adopt the same base ethos. We don't have to like each other. We have to agree to respect boundaries. And if both sides want to, cooperate on various projects. Inclusivity implies top-down authority and there's one right way, whereas a live and let live philosophy would only intervene in extreme situations. If we have a bunch of Silicon Valley EDM-loving tech bros looking to build a community, maybe the Amish that don't want to be around electricity aren't the best fit to be next-door neighbors. But ideally, both groups should be able to own land and live as they please. Or, a more serious example is Native Americans. Maybe they don't want to live around Silicon Valley tech bros, or white people altogether. There's enough land to easily make this happen. In your local community, some baseline standard of how to be would be understood by most, if not all, like things like how you treat each other, food, resources, and safety. Now, regarding body safety, referring to what would women do for a day without men. What they do is less interesting than digesting the reasons why. It is a notable disadvantage in life to have to expend focus maintaining a sense of hypervigilance because you don't feel safe. Anxiety takes effort to address, regardless of its source. But women can't even bring up the subject, partially because a solution within our capitalist system is nearly impossible, and also because the implications are triggering. And on a pragmatic level, because men are conditioned to view conversations and new ideas as debates, men offer what they believe are solutions, sadly before truly digesting the scale of the problem. Now, as an example, as a solution to her safety would be, take mace with you. But that ignores the bigger issue that women need to maintain a sense of hypervigilance in the first place. So also consider abortion rights. Both pro-life and pro-choice, when pushed to extremes, have the business interests deciding what to do with a person's body. To help reveal the bias, let's genericize the situation. So for guys, if a government could define something alive in our bodies like an amoeba plus some nanotech and give it corporate rights, is it your body, your choice? Or does the item the government has assigned corporate rights take priority? Are men okay with being forced to harbor nanotech amoebas in their body because the system deems them to be alive? So it's not about whether or not it's alive. The question is, who gets to choose? People, individuals, and communities, or the business world? And in the patriarchy, business can choose for women, but not men. It's hard to say what to do about toxic masculinity because in our top-down world, you kind of need to reach a lot of people and have some major re-education movement. However, in a decentralized model, especially when land price isn't an issue, women, like everyone else, could surround themselves with whoever they wanted. Communities could be set up that are just generally safer for women, and that gives them the opportunity to live with less anxiety. Or maybe communities would be tailored for kids. With more time and being healthy, the average person will have more needs met and likely have more options available in life. Today, women planning to have kids are put at a disadvantage as the financial realities of our rigged economy get mixed in with needing a relationship to work and a biological clock, all just to get the basic needs met. In a cooperative environment where people and communities own the land, having a healthy place to raise a kid would be a standard. Not having to choose between a biological clock and a career and finding yourself all before the age of 30 could reduce some layers of stress to the beings, women, who are generally tasked with nurturing. It's hard to predict what people will want and what they'll do because we don't even know what we're dealing with. We might want gated communities within gated communities because the government did that bad of a job. Much like how, hopefully, someone feels safer in their home, They would also feel safer in their inner perimeter because they're around people that they trust and know. In the outer zone, they'd still feel safe because it would be friends or friends of friend. And then if you wanted to get to the general public, which may or may not be crazy. And public roads don't necessarily have to have access to these new communities, also helping establish a peaceful vibe. Being more inclined to be outside and interact, people would be more likely to have casual social interactions that seem rare today because people are so busy. So when I mentioned a relaxed, decommodified state at Burning Man, this is what I meant. And the more we can normalize people living in a decommodified state, the more options we have moving forward. However, all of this requires the people owning the land. Healthy non-commoditized narratives are at odds with freedom-constricting systems like patriarchy or matriarchy. Both of those systems can work, they just require one group to always be the boss. A healthy narrative allows for those at the bottom to ask questions and help us course correct. And one such course correction is addressing why women feel less safe. But in conversation, when presented with an emotionally challenging idea, the masculine generally has the assumption to correct and debate versus trying to understand where the other person is coming from. It's not about just asking better questions or not interrupting, but more trying to change the whole goal and point of the conversation. There have been a few videos of younger people realizing how bad and soul-sucking our lives can be. So the mansplaining response is kind of, well, too bad.
In this video that's going viral, a young woman is crying because she has to commute to work. She said she's on the train by like 7, she's home by 6:15, and she's too tired. She just eats and then goes to bed, and it's like, welcome to what life is, and always has been. In fact, life was substantially worse 100, 200 years ago.
This is my first job, like my first 9 to 5 job after college. I get on the train at 7:30, and I don't get home till like 6:15 earliest, and then like I don't have time to do anything or either. Like I don't have energy to work out. Like that's out the window.
Just because things have always been bad doesn't mean that we should continue on that path. Regarding jokes, it's not the joke, but that it's told by men who remain unaware of the problem and the scale. What does it say to the feminine about self-worth when successful men post things like this? Now, it can just be a joke, but joking about unresolved situations is kind of a dick move. There's also the super machismo vibe.
I think Genghis Khan didn't feel that when he's getting all these reports from thousands of miles away that his borders are being attacked by this unknown group of bandits, and he's at constant war in 7 different directions, and his wife's probably complaining at the same time, and his favorite horse just died, and he's walking around doing Mongolian Aikido. If you're looking for calm and peace, you won't matter.
Now that could be excused as just entertainment, but it still contributes to the narrative where men remain unaware that they may need to be the ones to grow in certain areas.
What is it that leads to a strong partnership that a man and a woman should agree on as far as the roles in the relationship go?
For me, it's pretty clear. I wanted a woman that would enter my frame and be a complement to my life, not complicate it, sort of thing. And it's difficult for guys like me to find today because a lot of women are, the boss girl sort of crowd, and they're like, I need a man like a fish needs a bicycle, which is funny because usually as soon as something breaks or they need help with something that masculine, skills are applied to, then they're now, the little girl that needs help, sort of thing. So it's an interesting dynamic. Like fairness in a relationship, I think, is a contributor or a catalyst to the failure of that relationship because nothing in life is fair.
We're equal but different. Is that what you could agree to?
I would agree with that. Men and women are equal in society, but we're different.
Exactly. And in a relationship too, equal but different.
Yeah.
And then
I don't know that I want to apply equality or fairness to a relationship because it doesn't make sense to me. I wouldn't expect a woman to jump in front of somebody that was trying to rob us. The whole equality thing, like I don't think that we're equal. I think that we're different. And that's okay.
But equal in importance.
Yes.
You can't tell me that you want a woman to make 1,000 concessions for you and that you'd still respect her.
I would.
For what?
Because she's not a man. Men and women are different. Remember that. We talked about that before. Men and women are different.
That's just called autonomy.
Is it though?
Yeah, absolutely. Because no two people are identical.
Right.
It's not like we could all just agree on everything. So just like you're going to know who you are and I would know who I was, like you're not always going to agree. So you can respectfully disagree, or you can have the discussion, change your mind perhaps. I actually, like, part of doing this interview is I was hoping you could change my mind on some things, but I know I have my convictions about myself. I know who I am, and I'm not just going to bend over in every single category so a man can feel good about himself or so he cannot be challenged.
Yeah, but believe it or not, he's not trying to feel good about himself by not arguing with you. He just doesn't want to argue with you. He just wants peace in his life.
Woman, what does a man look at and they go, if she's got these things going
Oh,
on?
yeah. No, that's really funny. A friend of mine once said that men's standards are so low that she's just sexually available. That's it. When you start paying attention to what women's demands are today, they have a fascinating long laundry list of demands in what they expect from a guy, right? He's got to be competent. He's got to be tall. He's got to be funny. He's got to be fit. Did you ever hear about this website called the Female Delusion Calculator?
No, that sounds terrible.
Rather than spending your 20s partying, getting 17 degrees, on the wall, I think that your best use of your youth, which is when you're most valuable to men, is to develop yourself into that woman that guy that you want to be with is. If you want to get degrees and climb the corporate ladder and do all that stuff, that's fine. But don't be surprised, if you're 41 with 3 cats and you want to have a family and no guy is interested in you.
I'm almost 41 with 2 dogs.
Now, I'm not suggesting most men are like this, though maybe they are. This guy's entire presentation of wanting a girlfriend had everything to do with filling a social need, like food and socializing, and nothing to do with relating to someone on a personal level. A healthy connection between 2 people implies a team, and 2 humans on a team should both fare similarly well. So if her needs aren't met, and she's trying to talk to him, and the ego and business character get involved, and the conversation should be about improving the team, it gets lumped into whiny girlfriend or boss girlfriend or other deflections. Us poor men just want peace. Before they're born, females have all their eggs, so with a little nature magic, it would be easy to see how grandma's feelings of how things are and where they're headed can be passed down to their daughters and granddaughters. It's like men treat us like shit, but the world treats them like shit too, so maybe there's still hope. Like that kind of feeling. The authentic feminine is trying to communicate with the person behind the business character. The desire and need for a serious, authentic conversation grows, but there remains widespread resistance. What does it tell women that men want when society's leaders post this tweet? How long do women wait for men to come to the table? They can't talk because they're accused of being complaining. Can't get men to heal because men aren't open to new ideas. Can't get men to care because their baseline understanding of caring would have to be adjusted. You can't get men to even look because then you get mansplained. So if you can't communicate your needs, at some point you kind of just give up trying. Not just in life, but the overall push for that species. Oh, I included these pictures. This is Handmaid's Tale, where women basically were barely even human anymore. And this is from The Leftovers, The Remnant, I think it was called. And they basically decided just to stop talking because they weren't getting through to anyone. Capitalism sets what's required to live, like laws, labor, expensive land, and it doesn't favor a healthy environment. This is why we have both a toxic masculinity and toxic femininity. But since we are in the patriarchy, we men have to make the first move and acknowledge, without any requirement of the feminine, the existence of problems caused by toxic masculinity, and, to speak egotistically, be man enough to handle what could come after. It's about exploring an entirely different perspective, even if it's hard to digest. Some good advice. Superhero Cassie Lang, perhaps you know her as Ant-Man's daughter. It's never too late to stop being a dick. Quick review. Hydra, used by freedom-minded people and groups, won't be living in a world where people compete with AI and slave labor for jobs in an economy that was rigged and unnecessary in the first place. Because the incentive structure of the new economy won't be to fight each other, the new economy eventually becomes stronger and sets the narrative for things like who owns the land by default and who pays who to use it. The way people treat each other in that type of environment also allows for the masculine and feminine to both be what they want, limited only by social pressures and the people around you.
Skynet, what is that?
The Terminator is the favorite film of our founder. So they use the same name, but they want to put something good into the system. Have you seen a film just like a Black Mirror? You just stand there and your face there is a point. So maybe that is the future.
But that's like a horror show.
Yeah. Yeah.
Skynet's obsoletion doesn't mean we win a flat-out war, but that we grow out of needing the business world that is obsessed with creating crap like this in the first place. We are led to believe that our problems are so complex that we need AI to save us. The problem is not complicated, it's capitalism. We won't need AI to run our communities because cooperating when all sides want to is easier. There's no need to spend energy effectively fighting or coercing each other and marketing and lawsuits and exponential growth and armies and all that. AI isn't even well suited for this new direction. It spends gobs of energy crunching and indexing data to make smarter decisions. Who cares how smart your robot is or how well it imitates life? We can grow to trust our intuition such that we'll easily be on the right path without depending on AI. There's the superhero Domino from the movie Deadpool, and it has the superpower of luck. So it's kind of like manifesting and intuition. So AI and robots will still have plenty of uses, but we just don't need it in the middle of us interacting with each other and deciding what we want. Communities seeking to benefit from a new independent network, including internet, food production, entertainment, could use flexible software under our control that doesn't require their internet or economy. This new economic network, based on a different core, will incentivize large-scale cooperation, negating the need to depend on autonomous, smart computers like Skynet in the first place. The they played a dangerous game, making Americans feel entitled to freedom, because now we will fight for it with the fierceness of an indignant primate. The understood rules of the accepted game, not any player or group, run things. Some influencers judge those who follow orders or pull the trigger as examples of the problem in society. But when all angles are considered, the person pulling the trigger is no more guilty than the public who propped up the system that forced them into the war in the first place. It's easy to point the finger and say that someone else should have spoken out or refused orders or done a better job. But it's a bit hypocritical to do that unless the person pointing the finger has managed to live independent from our toxic system and provided a path for others to do the same. If they haven't, their hands are dirty too. With respect to the military, what did they fight and die for if the wars were based on lies? The answer is that America is the only country where people, perhaps naively, believed they were free, and thus willing to fight for it. The military sacrificed so that somewhere in this reality there's a group of people who are still collectively playing the game of life with personal freedom as a common goal. Refusing orders individually wouldn't impact the system and probably destroys that person's life. And if orders are refused en masse and the institution's stability becomes an issue, then you still don't have a good path towards freedom. So there aren't any good options. It takes generations of conditioning people to adopt these ethos so deeply. So if no one, anywhere, in this reality at least believed they were free, the direction of that species would be dark. I often wondered if I was like Truman yelling at other people, playing a role like actors with my own enslavement. Then what I thought was apathy could be something completely different. It seems as though the expected crash isn't going to come from delicacy. We only get a crash if those in charge want it. It was more rigged than I realized. So if Q is real, and Washington, D.C. is corrupt as we think, and most corporations are corrupted, then a crash would be easier on us because the good guys were ultimately in charge. And that's better than war and violence. One situation I didn't give enough weight to is the effect of Bitcoin. Before Bitcoin, The best case outcome with capitalism leading the charge, I felt, was idiocracy. No disrespect to President Camacho, but that wasn't really a hopeful future. But with Bitcoin, the usury arm of the business world faces fierce competition. We might not even need a massive shift to a cooperative economy to have human freedom be a priority in the narrative. However, I think Bitcoin only buys us time as the business world is crafty and persistent in their pursuit of more resources. But with Bitcoin and the surrounding engaged public, the business world could be held back for at least a little while. I plan to keep pushing forward in my part building a cooperative network because I still feel like that's the better option. And it's not even wholly my idea. Many of the ideas of how things could develop and scale up came directly from the book Freedom. Moving forward, people technically don't need an immediate massive shift. They only need to stand their ground, so to speak, and not take any jabs. And then the business world will be forced to show their next play, likely weakening their position.
There was a joke in Punch some time ago, many years ago, I remember, of an army doctor interviewing a private. The private says, "Every time I shake my leg like this, it hurts." He said, "God damn it, don't shake it."
Devil's Workshop 23.